Good afternoon and welcome back to Goldmark TV. Another fantastic broadcast for you. I've got the easy job today of introducing you to our three upcoming films, because in a minute we've got the fantastic art writer and critic David Whiting is going to welcome you to the wonderful work of Robert Dawson. Then later, Mike Goldmark, founder of the Goldmark Gallery, is going to be talking about Sir John Tenniel's illustrations for Alice in Wonderland. They're really beautiful little prints. And then to round off today, we'll be travelling back in time and seeing Phil Rogers fire his wood fire kiln in 2008. It's a fantastic bit of footage, interesting for potters and for collectors alike. I hope you really enjoy what we've got in store for you today.
I think the thing about Robert Dawson is he's essentially a painter of borderlands. And it's interesting that he was actually born in Ludlow in Shropshire, very much near the Welsh border. If you look at his painting, he was a painting of sort of peripheral places, of the areas in between open fields and mountains and hillsides, and the more developed areas, the ramshackle farmyards, the built-up areas that you find in the countryside. And he liked the unobvious places. He liked the slightly messy, down at heel areas, the places where you could see signs of human activity which might have already gone. Empty chapels, farmyards that had been left derelict. A sense of a peopled landscape, but a landscape actually without people, because he was dealing with all the characters of the country. But those characters you found were manifested in the buildings themselves, the chimneys, the windows. Peggy Dawson, his widow, said that if you looked at a Dawson house, you were looking at somebody's face. You were looking at perhaps 4 windows and a front door. And in a sense, those were his people. Those were the people that he found more interesting than human figures. So you see very few human figures in a Dawson. His landscapes seem empty until you look a bit closer, and you see that they're crackling with life. They're full of intrigue, and you wonder what's going on just around the corner. There's quite a lot of mystery in a Dawson landscape. And I think that he's a slow burn painter in that respect. He's a stealth painter. You have to live with a Dawson for quite a long time to really begin to get a sense of what he was about. He was a self-taught artist, and in many ways a self-taught man. And he came to art by quite a circuitous route, in the sense that he had an early facility with painting and drawing and so on. When it was suggested that he might go to study art in Stoke-on-Trent, he never made it, because his mother was actually worried that he might be sick on the bus. He had a few health problems, and it turned out that he was actually had lung problems and so forth, because his father smoked very heavily. He was so poor Robert Dawson ended up as a passive smoker. A doctor suggested that he needed to find an instrument that would just keep the airways clear and working, flexing. And so he ended up eventually as an alto sax in a big band. He actually did get a bit of some experience as a painter in Leek, going to evening class. And that helped him enormously, because he got the basics that he needed. But he did have a natural facility anyway. It was there, it was there. So he developed quickly and easily. The painting just really took off, I suppose, when he left music, he left the big band, and he began to teach in primary schools. And that gave him long holidays, long vacations, when he could really enjoy time touring with his wife in a car, and they would actually go around various areas that really interested him. For example, in Wales, the Peak District, Staffordshire, Derbyshire, Devon, and occasionally to East Anglia, but it was mainly Wales. He was mainly drawn west.
We used to stay at Movanbury Kitchen's cottage, which was lovely. And Bob did a lot of painting round there at Dolgestlai and all round that area, at Cadaridris. But Bob always painted no matter where he was. He just couldn't stop. It was something he did non-stop. There was always a pad in the car. He kept a pad in the car that he used. And sketch all day long, and when we got home at night, while I was getting a meal, he would be making them into watercolours. He just did it non-stop. He could not stop.
I mean, I think that you get the sort of genuine Bob Dawson in many ways, not just in the oils, in the sort of more obviously ambitious paintings, but in the watercolours and the pen and inks. Well, you get the basic structures in a Dawson painting, don't you? You have that, again, you have that sense of the verticals and horizontals, the angles. And Peggy Dawson talked about how Bob liked to just stop the car anywhere and spontaneously get out and start to draw. And I think it must have taken him quite a long time sometimes to get from A to B, simply because he would always want to stop the car and start to make these kind of sketches on the spot. He actually, in the end, became a sort of honorary Welsh painter. He was actually elected to the Royal Cambrian Academy. Now, this wasn't bad for someone who was essentially self-taught. He enjoyed that status in Wales because they recognised, I think, one of their own, and so eventually he was championed by Cuffin Williams. And Cuffin recognised the generosity of the paint surfaces in Dawson's work.
The main thing about his work was that he really did love the world around him. He loved the sky, and he loved the sea, and he loved the cottages, and he loved the slate fences. And that was dominant. That is totally different to what goes on today. Because in the past, the subject very much dominated the picture. And Bob was a man who loved the subject, and he put it down with tremendous humility. And I don't think he was ever really very pleased with what he painted. I have a feeling he painted it, he had to get it off his mind, but he didn't say, "That's jolly good, I like that." He wasn't that sort of person. His pictures are sensuous, they're romantic. He loves dark skies and shafts of bright light and things. They're very much part of him, I think. Certainly the handling of the paint, I'm sure. He being a generous person, he did use rich paint. He loved the quality of rich paint. It's a very interesting thing, I think, about the quality of paint. You can usually tell the character of an artist by his paint. I think it was a certain simplicity about Wales. The Welsh cottage was not something which showed off. He never showed off. And I think he liked things which were absolutely basic and natural. And all the little lanes he painted, and roads and stone walls and things, they were all created naturally, not for effect.
He loved the grandeur of it, I suppose. He loved the colours. He painted in quite a limited palette at times. He loved them. He just loved the scenery. It wasn't unlike Staffordshire, really.
He loved cows. He wasn't at all attracted to sheep because he said that sheep were formless, dull things. Whereas he found in cattle real personalities. So you see a lot of cattle in Dawson pictures. You see a narrative in a lot of his pictures, not necessarily quite as strong as this, because actually here he's got a human figure as well. Very often you get a nice, either a slate fence or a stone wall in the foreground. You get the posts, you get the things that normally get neglected, the sort of corrugated iron. His interest in very quite ordinary structures. It's interesting, the thing about Bob Dawson is that you very rarely get the kind of obvious church that you get in so many landscapes punctuating the skyline or whatever. He wasn't attracted to special buildings of that type at all, and if he was attracted to any kind of religious building, it would probably be a chapel, a nonconformist chapel. He loved areas of the landscape that were about abandoned industry, or industry that was in decline but had been thriving. So if you go to chapel territory in a lot of the landscapes that interested him, you were very often going to landscapes of light or quite heavy industry too. And again, you get the activity of the paint surface to do with the almost, I mean, here this is quite an expressive piece for him, because you've got quite a lot of turmoil going on in the paintwork.
When he was a boy, his father was a postman and used to take him out on his van. And he used to love the scenery, and he used to go out all weathers, and the scenery in Staffordshire was very, very grand and very dramatic. It was wonderful. He loved it.
Godlike and slow I move among my paints. The shapes with which I lately strove mock me from the canvas. A serenity to match the mood of nature's theme evades my colour. Such unholiness of form, violent perplexity of hue bespeak of barrenness within. The soul too, you see, has its October days.
Interestingly, he would start with a very strong ground colour, and it does actually show through occasionally in different places. The other feature you often get in a Dawson landscape is the essential highlight, you know, the highlight here, the red highlight here on the jumper, whatever, and the farmer. A lot of this work would have been produced on site as they moved around in Wales in particular, also parts of the West Country, and up in the north of England as well. But you begin to build up a very strong sense of Bob Dawson land, which is very much the landscape of fields and houses, and the back of beyond, the places beyond the tourist spots, if you like. Sometimes quite down at heel places, humble places, and places that often tended to be overlooked by the more obvious painters. Again, I mean, this would be another example of his on-the-spot work done quite spontaneously, but unusually, I mean, quite unusually for Dawson. This is quite an architectural picture. It's a tighter piece of drawing, but it's important work for him to do, because he's really getting to grips again with the architectural structure of the buildings, and indeed the architectural structure of the tree. But look at this. This is all about materials. It's all about corrugated iron. It's about modern farm building rather than necessarily traditional farm building. Again, he focuses on what might seem to a lot of people to be profoundly ordinary.
(1865) saw the publication of what was to become known as perhaps the world's most famous children's book, Alice in Wonderland. Sir John Tenniel was commissioned to draw the illustrations, which were going to be printed using wooden blocks. He made those illustrations, and the blocks were then sent with the illustrations to the DL brothers to do the engraving. It was suggested to the publishers that it was not going to be a good idea to use the wood blocks because they would become damaged during the printing process. So electrotype plates were made. That was a metal plate made by a process of electrolysis, and the first and all subsequent editions of Alice were printed from those electrotypes. So the wooden blocks were actually never used. In 1975, a remarkable thing happened. Somebody opened a safe at Macmillan's, the publishers, and in there they found 91 out of the 92 original blocks cut for both Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. The only block that seemed to have disappeared was, almost fittingly, the dodo. The blocks were then given to, in fact, a friend of mine, Jonathan Stevenson, at the Rocket Press, who spent the next 2 years of his life making an edition of 250 sets only, printing from the original blocks for the very first time. The 250 sets sold out very, very quickly. The blocks will never be printed from again. So here you have a first-class opportunity to own one of the original Alice in Wonderland illustrations printed directly from the block. And here's a selection of them, absolutely wonderful, faultless pieces of engraving from the world's greatest children's book.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed learning about Robert Dawson and John Tenniel today, two very different artists, but wonderful in their own right. Our Phil Rogers exhibition continues unabated here at the gallery. We've had a really fantastic response. Lots of pots off to new homes. It's been wonderful to see. We've also been enjoying looking back through our archival footage of times we've gone to film Phil at work in the studio. And we've got a real treat for you today. This was back in 2008 that we went to Phil's studio in Rhayader, and we filmed him firing his wood kiln. This was really in the sort of the early days of his getting to know the kiln, getting to know the processes, the glazes that would work and in which places. So what you're about to see is Phil and his team working through that. A wonderful opportunity for potters and amateur potters out there to get an insight into what wood firing is like, and for us lay people a sort of fascinating insight into all the different considerations that a potter has got to go through, and some wonderful slow video for you to watch. I hope you really enjoy this.
It's still very much a learning curve for me, because I think only the second one ever. There's an awful lot to it, and there are potters who've been firing with wood for literally decades, so to get a good firing out in the second firing will be more than I can hope for, really. I mean, it's going to be patchy. There will be things that don't work, and there'll be things that possibly might. They stop the pots from sticking to the shelves or to the kiln. We call it wadding. It's just a mixture of fire clay, alumina hydrate, and it doesn't melt, or it doesn't attract any kind of, it's very refractory, the alumina hydrate, and so it stops the pot from sticking to the shelves. thing about kilns is it's amazing how even a small space can use up a lot of pots. You know, you just kind of think, oh well, this is just a few pots to sort of as a little add-on, but in fact we'll probably get 50 or 60 pieces in here.
How many in the whole kiln?
I think there's probably about 350, something like that, I would think. Ranging in size from quite large to quite small. A lot of these glazes are entirely experimental, so they're all new glazes that I've just mixed up. So it's all a little bit guesswork. You know, I'm not quite sure the best places to put the pots to get the best effects, because I've never fired these glazes before. So it's all a question of trying to mix it all up and make sure that at least one example of the glaze is in every part of the kiln, so that next time we have a better idea of where to put them, you know.
Yes, of course it is.
And then when this one gets to about 900, 920, 940, we start stoking this one as well. So we keep the whole thing more in tandem, you know what I mean?
Although we're letting that one drop off a bit, like, but...
Well, only when it gets to temperature. I mean,
Are you going to try and maintain the finished temperature?
yeah. The idea is to try and keep that one hot while this one's getting hot. I think what happened last time, apart from the fact that it was uneven, was that this one cooled too quickly too. And I think that the cold air coming in from the firebox cooled this chamber much too quickly. So I might not move those bricks down there this time. We'll see how it goes, and fire it from air from the spy hole, which is down, I think, below. Yeah, there's a spy hole down there behind those bricks, rather than having air coming under the firebox. So that when we finish this one, we can just bung that in and we don't have air coming in, although we can still stop it up from the far end. But so with this one, it might be that we'll take that out and put some rings here and the cones, yeah.
I know we got a wider spiral on this side for that reason, for the rings.
If it's not the right temperature, what am I going to do about it? There's nothing I can do. I mean, it's just a question of seeing, kind of recording how even it was, really. So I've kept away from Temako this time. These are all Shino glazes, all sort of new glazes, really. And this is Nuka, the white ash glaze. A little bit of grit or dust or something in it. Yeah, you want a bit of wadding under those inside ones now, a little bit. This is the salt chamber. So the idea of this is that once we've finished firing the first chamber, this one comes up to temperature, and then we'll put some salt in here and have a wood-fired salt glaze. But I can't emphasize enough how much all of this is very much in the sort of experimental stages, and it's a question really of trying and seeing what the kiln gives us and what the problems are and what the good things are, and trying to sort it all out afterwards and finding a way with it, because it's very much new, all this, to me. The salt goes in here, wood will go in here to help raise the temperature inside this chamber, and then once the temperature is up, we can then put the salt in through here. It vaporizes, and the sodium part of the salt reacts with the silica and the alumina in the clay body and in the slips to form a glaze. Of Can't help thinking I've put these pots too close to the fire, really, but never mind, we'll take a chance.
Do you want to put a course of bricks in front, Phil, as a kicker?
Well, then they're not going to get into the embers then, are they?
No.
No, I think we'll just take a chance. I mean, if, you know, as long as we don't actually as long as we don't hit them with the wood.
Yeah.
It's all right, that's enough. Yeah, I don't want to go too mad, because otherwise we'll build up too much heat too soon. The idea of this is to use big lumps of wood which will burn slowly and let the heat off gently so that it warms the kiln up over this evening and tonight, you know. It also deposits a little bit of ash throughout the kiln, which can be quite nice. That should do.
Not too bad.
Where's 3 and 4 then?
The first time I've done the wickets.
Do you think we could do this a different way so that we can get a bigger spy hole?
Yeah.
Well, they're just made of china clay and sawdust, and then when they're fired, the sawdust burns out, and it leaves the brick that's a bit like an Aero chocolate bar, you know. So it's very good insulating properties. Bugger, 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 bugger. That's it. This time. There we are.
Right?
Yeah. Well, we're in the early stages, really. I mean, the first chamber is only at 300 and something, and the second chamber is barely 100. So it's very much the early stages, still warming up the second chamber. Flame is beginning to be visible in the first chamber. You can see the flame moving through the chamber. So it's just a matter of perseverance, really. But it's going fine. I mean, I don't want it to go too fast. I think that'll do it. So pull that back a little bit. Yeah, that's a quarter open now. So is it burning better in there now? Still pretty dull, isn't it?
I dumped it off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's burning better now. I think once the kiln gets to a point where the flame is literally from here to the top of the chimney, then it'll even out. How many is that? About 6?
Yep.
What's that? 3M?
All right.
I did something there first. Do you see what I did? I poked it about before I put the rest of it.
Well, on that side it didn't go up one.
There you go. Kamataki means firing.
When you're stoking, the flame pattern changes in the back.
Yeah.
It goes up when you stoke it.
Yeah, that's because there's more back pressure because it's letting more air in. See? So if you, I'd be much happier if I could see flame coming out of the spirals of the door, and but I don't think we're going to get that, not with temperature rise. So I think we've just got to keep stoking quite often to keep that atmosphere inside oxygen starved and smoky, rather than relying on lots of back pressure.
That's why I was trying to poke it.
So make sure that the stoking doesn't get to a point where it's burning too clean, and then keep stoking again. Stoke regular, so that you know when it gets to the peak, don't wait for it to drop. Just keep it going. Yeah.
Right.
It's 10:11 now, so we need another. We need to stoke again now, I think. It's going okay. It's a little bit slow, but then it's a big kiln and it's lots of brick to heat up. So I think you know, we just have to keep persevering with it. It's over 1,000 on the pyrometer, which means that in fact inside the kiln it's probably a little more than that. Yeah, it's okay. We'll hopefully be around about 1150 to 1200 by the morning, I would think. I just think back to Ken's firing, and we were putting wood in there for 5 days, and the temperature never went up at all. It just stayed the same the whole time. But what we did have was a really good strong flame at all the blowholes. Okay.
Anything in the back?
We've been firing now for 7 and 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, so that's 28 hours we've been firing. We're at about 1170, 1180 degrees centigrade, so we should really have another 100 degrees to go yet. And it's all being a bit slow. It's not this kind of firebox, which is not a firebox that's where the wood is suspended on fire bars, is not the most efficient firebox. And I did that deliberately because I didn't want the firing to take place in a very short space of time. But the problem we've had is that the temperature has stuck at certain points during the firing for a number of hours, and we haven't been able to move it on, and we are having a bit of that problem now, really. But I think by this afternoon we should get pretty much there. We've got some cones in the chamber. The cones are little ceramic items that show us not so much temperature, but the amount of work that the heat has done. And when that happens, the cone bends, it melts and bends over. So when those cones bend, that's really when we'll stop, more than reading the pyrometer. The pyrometer is much more as an indication as to the rate of climb, rather than telling you when to switch the kiln off. You switch the kiln off, you don't switch this kiln off, you stop firing this kiln. Going back to my electric days. You stop fire in this kiln when the cone goes down, not when the pyrometer says a particular temperature. But we'll just keep at it, keep persevering.
$93, $99, nearly. Look, $99. Magic. It's magic. $99. It's gonna go.
Yes! 1200.
Dropped. Don't get quick. Dropped. Yes.
Oh, we've got 1200 now, so that's that's good. But we've had to compromise a little bit on the atmosphere in the kiln to get it. And it means that the bottom of the kiln is a little bit ahead of the top now, which is not so good, but maybe we can even that out later. If we can get the temperature up to about 1260, and then we can hold it at that temperature with the dampers, and then that will even out the temperature inside a little bit, with a little bit of luck. We just started putting the salt in. We got to the temperature where we can start to introduce the salt, and it will, volatilize, and then the sodium element of the salt will combine with the silica and the alumina in the clay to form a glass, and that's the essence of salt glazing. And we just have to introduce salt now gradually over a period of about an hour and a half to allow it to build up a thickness of glass on the surface of the pots.
It's taken quite a long time to get to this point. Why is that?
Because I don't know what I'm doing. It's taken a long time because that's what the kiln is about. It's not a kiln that fires in a few hours, even 10 hours or 15 hours. The whole idea is to take 36, 40 hours over the firing to get a long melt and the sort of effects that you can achieve with wood. If you fire quickly with wood, it can come out of the kiln looking like it's been fired in an electric kiln, and I've seen that happen. So to get wood-fired effects, you really need to fire over an elongated period. Some wood firers will fire for 5 days, 7 days, some for even 10 days. So build up all that effect that the ash mixing with the clay and so on will give you. So this, for a wood firing, this is actually quite short, believe it or not. We've been firing now for about 40 hours, which is long enough for me, but by comparison to a lot of people, is not that long, really. The salt comes right at the end because we're firing the second and last chamber of the kiln, or third really, third and last chamber of the kiln. And the last thing that one does is to put the salt in, so that what you don't want to happen is for the salt to infiltrate into the pots that you've already fired in the previous chamber. And the salt is always last because it's always nearest to the chimney and therefore exits immediately. You've put the salt in. It doesn't affect the pots that are in the previous chambers that are now already fired and finished, So this will take about another hour and a half, and then we should be finished. So time for a beer.
Okay.
Yeah. I can see an iron spot. At least I think it is.
Where?
Behind the ring, just above the ring.
Oh yeah.
Well, that could be.
One. Well, there's something different there.
Well, if you get reduction in a kiln, it brings iron pyrite that are in the body. to the surface, and you can get a sort of speckled effect with little dots of iron oxide. It can be very pretty. And if you're trying to assess whether you've got a reduction atmosphere, if you look into the kiln and try to spot one or two of these little iron spots, you know that there's a good sign.
Yeah.
Up there, on the top shelf in the middle, is hot. I have a feeling that it's the middle shelves that are not going to get hot because of the flow. There's nothing to pull the heat to them because it's just blank wall. And I need to bring that off the wall so that the flame can get down the back of it to get out. Silly mistake. We're more or less finished now, and all I'm doing now is we've put the last of the salt in, so I'm just burning some wood to clean up the kiln, make the atmosphere clean, burn the last of the salt away so that it's up the chimney and gone. If you clam the kiln up, if you stop with salt still in the chamber, it can sully the pots and leave a residue. So I try to clean as much of it out as I can with some clean burn, oxidizing burn, and then once that's done, take about half an hour, and then we close up the dampers, seal the kiln, and that's it. Fun, done, finished. This particular firing is the second firing of this kiln, and I'm on a big learning curve. I mean, you know, it's new to me. I've always fired with oil or gas, so wood firing is a new venture. I'm pleased in that compared to the first firing, it was much more controlled. We had a lot more control over what was going on. The two chambers, the two main chambers, are much more even in their temperature. I'm slightly worried that this chamber has not reduced enough. That's something we're going to have to look at. I'm not sure about why, but I think it's not reduced enough. This one, I feel, looking in at the moment, looks okay, but when it's red hot, it's very difficult to tell. The firebox, where there are pots too, it's a kind of miniature little anagama firebox. That didn't get to temperature, and I know why, and I can put that right, and so, you know, it was a lesson to be learnt, and there we are. So, a mixture really. Some of it's okay, some of it I was a little bit disappointed with, but I think generally not too bad. It's been 37 hours. So it's a long time. Everybody's tired and hot and ready for a beer and some food. But I think it was okay. It's a learning curve.
We need to educate, entertain our customers.
Okay, so now we're going to look at some other of his prints.
Thinking very seriously about stopping making pots.
There was nothing forced, and I think his jogs are really the epitome of that.
Hello, welcome to today's broadcast from the Goldmark Gallery.
One of my most regular places to visit up in this part of the world is the Goldmark Gallery.